Hello, and thank you for listening in today. I hope you are doing well and that things are going smoothly for you this week. Last full week before Christmas, y'all. Super excited. I think we're all ready for a good, cheerful holiday season, get in the Christmas spirit, and all that fun stuff. But today, I just wanted to take a few minutes and discuss some of the ramifications and the impacts of the shutdown slash lockdown slash capacity limitations. There are a few statistics out there that are third party verifiable, third party credible, and such. You can literally go through it and Google it as we're watching and going through these facts. You can verify it. But I think it really helps paint a picture as to why these shutdowns and lockdowns are not the best way to go about it. And as we go through this, keep in mind, we're not saying individuals and businesses should not be careful or anything like that. Yes, we must absolutely be careful. We need to take precautions. We need to be safe, all of that. However, shutting things down, locking things down, extensive capacity limitations, more than likely not the right approach. And we're going to elaborate on why here. Again, we're going to go through the data first and then kind of discuss it after. But to kind of set the framework here, the piece that I would like to start off with is actually an article by the New York Times. And again, you can Google this and verify it. And it was an interview with Melinda Gates. And I'm going to be quoting things and reading things off directly. So bear with me as I look at my notes on the computer here. But in this interview, they were discussing the economics relating to pandemics and pandemic planning, implementing policy, so on and so forth. And when they were discussing reviewing these pandemics, implementing these policies, so on and so forth, this is the direct quote from Melinda Gates. It says that they, quote, hadn't really thought about the economic impacts, end quote. Hadn't really thought about the economic impacts. That's just the framework that I want you to keep in mind as we go through the data that we're about to go through. It hadn't really been considered or thought out. Let that sink in. Think about the meaning of that and the depth of that. Now we'll go into the actual data that we know and that we have. Since COVID, nearly 100,000 businesses, small businesses, have closed permanently or long-term, which is basically permanently. And again, you can find that data from various sources, but the one that I pulled right off the bat was from Fortune. And so you can Google that 100,000 businesses closed, Fortune will pop right up. So we know that over 100,000 businesses, small businesses, have closed their doors permanently or long-term because of COVID and the way that it's been handled, specifically in relating to these shutdowns and lockdowns. Beyond that, there was an article on Alignable, and this is fascinating. Well, actually, tell you what, let's jump ahead to one here first real quick. So we talked about it a little last week in a blog. This article is from Business Insider. Back in September, around 100,000 restaurants were closed permanently or long-term, and there's much bigger mix in that sub-demographic of businesses compared to the last statistic. About 30,000 businesses were permanently closed. Restaurants were permanently closed. But here's the other frightening one. The net impact of employment as it relates to this, because you have people that were unemployed in, I think it was in April, massive waves of unemployment. Then the economy started to grow again. The net impact back in September was negative 3 million jobs. Let that number sink in. 3 million jobs. It's no small number. Then the next stat I want to share is from Alignable. And again, if you Google these statistics and type Alignable, it's going to pop right up. 85% of small business owners need additional relief, according to their surveys and studies. 48% risk failure by year's end within the next few weeks. And only 43% of small businesses are confident that they will make it through June of 2021. So think about the depth of that final statistic, especially. If they had to bet money, 57% of businesses said that they would bet money they're not going to be here in 2021. That is a frightening statistic. Frightening. Because that's not just impacting the small business community. That's not just impacting one part of our economy. That's impacting the entirety of our economy, which impacts every single one of us. So let's remember that statistic as well. With all of this in mind, New York just came out and said, be prepared for another full wave of shutdowns. And again, you can find that on various news sources. So despite everything that we know about the virus, the way it's impacted businesses, the way our responses have impacted the businesses, we're still floating the idea of shutdowns and lockdowns and all that stuff, basically eliminating revenue or greatly capping it. And as we discussed in our blog last week, one industry, for example, the restaurant industry, and you can find these statistics from the National Restaurant Association. They literally have a couple of articles on it. They run very tight profit margins. The restaurants do, especially small restaurants, typically around 3 to 5%. So if you cut revenue by even 20%, heaven help us, 50, we're massive, massive problems if we lock it down and put it at 0% capacity. But if you do that, even just trimming a little bit of that revenue off takes away the profit margin. That small business owner has to find a source of funding and financing. Where are they going to get it? They can't get it from a bank because no bank will finance a business that loses money. That's not a good business model. That's not the way the system works. So then the next thought is, okay, well, let's go get the government to subsidize it. Let's get the government can put in a relief package. Okay. For how long? Because this is the other part that is often lost in discussion. That small business owner pays more taxes than perhaps anyone in the cycle of business and economics. Let me explain why. They pay sales tax. They pay property tax in many cases, licensing fees, income tax, often twice or more. They pay employment tax. The list goes on and on. That's not even taking into the cost of goods and expenses, so on and so forth. So after everything all combined, that small business owner produces a very large tax base for the government to get funding from that funds the government. If that tax producing individual or business ceases to produce tax dollars, where are we going to get the tax dollars to fund that business? It's kind of like taking cash out of your right pocket, putting it in your right pocket, and saying, now you have more money. The government doesn't create wealth like that. That's the role of the free market, of small businesses, mid-size, large size, so on and so forth. The government doesn't create wealth. The government can't create wealth like that. So when we're talking about subsidizing businesses, we have to have a source to draw from. Unfortunately, some of the people who need it perhaps most in this situation are the people who produce those tax dollars. You can't take the tax dollars from the one giving it and then give it back to them and say, here's your help, because they gave it to you originally. So that plan can't sustain itself. You might be able to get it to work for a little while, like PPP, for example. But that's not a long-term sustainability question. And I think, again, going back to how we opened this, the statement where the economic impacts had not been fully considered, I don't think that's the model we want to build for sustainability, just practically speaking. However, there's a whole nother dimension to this discussion that is not being discussed very much at all, especially when we're talking economics and stuff, because they play very closely together. So bear with me here. And the discussion we're going to embark on now includes mental health. Since COVID started, again, you can find this from various sources. The articles that I'm pulling it from right now, it's going to be Forbes, which again gets a lot of its data from the CDC and so forth. About 1 in 3 Americans have displayed clinical signs of anxiety or depression or both since COVID began. About 20% of Americans have said they experienced a physical reaction when thinking about the outbreak. Not when doing something related to it, when thinking about it. 18% of Americans said they experienced nervousness or anxiety most or all the time during the past week. And this article was written maybe 2 months ago or so. During the past week, which doubled from over 2 years ago when it was 9%. And again, this is all coming from Forbes article. The text messages to the federal disaster distress hotlines increased by more than 1,000% this year. And this is one, I think, that ties it all together in the discussion of economics and capacity lockdowns, restrictions, lockdowns, shutdowns, so on and so forth. Mental health is poorest among those who have been unemployed 6 months or more. At the outset, you're kind of like, well, no freaking kidding. Go figure. I mean, if someone's unemployed for 6 months, it's going to take a toll on them in and of themselves. In and of itself, you throw in a pandemic, and it's like, yeah, that's a real issue. That's exactly the point. This is a very real issue. but you will not solve it by locking things down, shutting the economy down, or limiting capacity by large amounts, especially. I think small businesses have demonstrated time and time again we are very, very willing to do what needs to be done to operate safely. But shutting everything down is not the long term solution or answer to this problem. What happens is, as we've seen this year, unfortunately, the economic impacts weren't fully considered or thought through before implementing such policies. That's the framework that we're working under. So we need to change that part. But just look at the data. Again, verifiable data that we've seen. About 100,000 small businesses have permanently closed. That's no small number. And again, as we've noted previously, that's not just one job that's lost. That's a family whose livelihood has been dramatically changed. It's employees, multiple, who are no longer employed. I mean, the one statistic we had in the restaurant industry alone was 3 million. 3 million people without jobs. We know that this contributes to a negative/poor mental health environment. Yet when we're looking at the idea of shutting everything down, rather than saying, okay, you know what, that might not be the right approach. We did it early on. We didn't know what we were dealing with. Might have made a mistake. Mistakes happen. Granted, that's a big mistake to make. Mistakes happen. But when we repeatedly do something time and time again, when we are aware of the consequences or results or whatever term we want to use, that is no longer, you can't count that as a mistake. That's a deliberate, intentional decision. And statistically speaking, we can't sustain this model of shutting down, locking down. There's nothing that disputes that conclusion. There's no study out there that says, yeah, we can shut down for another 3-6 months without a problem. And you won't find that study because we can't. We can't afford it. Small businesses can't afford it. And the problem here is when you push that small business to closure, we're hitting a massive portion of the overall economy. I've said it. We've said it here at the McGraw Council time and time again. As the small business community goes, so goes the American economy. If we all want to get through this and get through it well, we have to leave businesses open. And again, to bring it full circle, no, we're not saying don't be smart. Of course, be smart. I mean, a lot of the examples that you can look for safety have been set by small business owners. A lot of these businesses have gone above and beyond to ensure safety. You see restaurants putting up plexiglass and distancing and rearranging their layout. Some have voluntarily reduced their capacity. That's their decision. But taking a broad brush approach to this, locking down, shutting down, limiting capacity by large amounts, the next question should be, okay, in so doing, how do we sustain that economically? Because the bills don't stop. The landlord still needs to be paid. The interest needs to be paid. Those who work need to be paid. The bills, the expenses, they don't stop. But the killer here is that we're stopping the revenue. And unfortunately, when you flip the trigger, the economic trigger, and you turn it off by shutting the economy down, as we noted earlier this year, it's not a light switch turning it back on. It takes time. That's the other major component we need to consider here. When you shut everything down like that, things don't just come back. Look at the restaurant industry, for example. You shut that thing down for a month. Just use 30 days. Well, that's obviously heavily based on food, and that perishes. So when that completely stops, you affect the supply chains, which affects inventory and storage. Perishables go bad, so there's enormous waste. You can't deliver it. And that goes down the whole line of the supply chain. The supply chain needs to be rescheduled. The supply chain needs to be reproduced, restructured. The producers need to seriously evaluate the demand and the production levels and their capacity. A shutdown doesn't just impact the small business on Main Street. It impacts a whole lot more. And that's another component of the discussion that hasn't really been addressed a whole lot. So when we're saying you can't shut the economy down, that's the wrong thing to do. It's not out of an agenda. The only agenda that is here is what's best What's best for everyone? What's best for the small business community? Because that's a key metric in the overall economy, which is a key metric for the American people. It's a metric that we watch, that we need to monitor and support. So as we're going through this, shutting the small business community down doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't eliminate COVID. So we have to figure out a way to operate safely. Operating safely and running a business are not mutually exclusive terms. They can be accomplished together. So the discussion needs to be, how can we operate safely and profitably without shutting down, without limiting a business's revenue and profits, because otherwise you're going to experience economic shrinkage. And once you go down that road, that's a hard road to reverse/fix. And as I mentioned previously, business owners have continually exemplified and shown that they're willing to do what it takes to be safe. Restaurants are putting up plexiglass, where staff's all wearing masks. They're being extra safe. Home service companies are wearing a lot of masks. They're wearing the protection. They're going above and beyond. We can operate safely and at full capacity. Shutting everything down or limiting capacity like that to the point where business is no longer profitable, that is the model that is not sustainable. So the whole point of today's Facebook Live video is really to harp on that point. When people float the idea or implement the idea of shutdowns or lockdowns and capacity limitations, there's a lot of data out there that says that's not the right way to go. And we're in December now, really kind of started back in March. So maybe 9 months or so in, we can conclusively look back and say, you know what, those shutdowns might not have been the right call economically speaking, because COVID continued to spread, businesses shut down. Here we are. What do we do going forward? Well, we learn from the past. We don't shut down. We don't lock down. It's not good for the small business community. It's not good for the economy. It's not good for the American people. We need to be safe and operate at full capacity, find somehow, some way, because we cannot operate at a loss. That is not sustainable business. Y'all stay safe, stay blessed. Continue to keep driving that small business, that supports small business message home. Y'all buy local. If you're going to eat out, buy it from a local restaurant. If you have to buy something locally, maybe get that last little Christmas gift. Maybe replace a stocking that the dog might have ripped, or maybe you just find a good stocking stuffer, so to speak. Go buy local. Support those local small businesses wherever they may be. Y'all stay safe, stay blessed, and we'll talk again soon.